And if we were to say what Somavedic actually does in the human body, or how does it help me? Does it help me with sleep? Does it help me breathe better?
My biggest problem is always that there are terabytes flying around here and over here they go, just kilobytes. So I apologize that sometimes I have to sort out the sentences. I wouldn't use the word Somavedic as an influence on a person, but rather as an influence on the environment, cleansing that environment. Of course, there are some frequencies that are directly intended for people. Now I'm trying to do research with those photons because that's where the transfer of information, that energy, into the body happens. However, the main point is to cleanse the space where a person sleeps. It's exactly the same as if you flew somewhere. And I don't know, maybe even today in the Alps there's 5G everywhere, and you have signal, of course, that's what people want. But somewhere in an environment without any geopathogenic zones, there wouldn't be any electrosmog. But then again, it's either too hot, too cold, or too dusty there. On the other hand, when I was in Arabia a few times, they make these nice plastic palm trees that hide BTS towers, so that 5G is absolutely everywhere. And I just had to take a picture of one of them once. Nevertheless, the environment would have to be this clean, because at that moment the body starts. I have this theory that during sleep, when of course it consists of many different parts, one of the most important is deep sleep, which an average person gets for about 10 to 20 minutes. From what I've observed from friends and colleagues, and there have been some tests done in America, originally by a Japanese doctor, Dr. Shea from G-Infinity. They did it using the Hour Ring, they did it using Whoop, they did it using BioStrap. And now they're doing it with Ultrahuman. And an average person who isn't completely balanced mentally or in their environment. For example, even with the help of Somavedic, only gets about 10, at most 20 minutes of deep sleep. With Somavedic, even with just about 5, at most 5 hours of sleep. I usually get around an hour and a half, an hour and 50 minutes of deep sleep. But that's the most important thing. That's the real recovery. You connect yourself to the charger from the earth, because I believe that. From that core, that so-called radioactivity, that's what keeps a person alive. It's the same as when you charge your phone. You have a powerful charger. You need to lie down and get that long, deep sleep, just like after every surgery. They of course put you under so that your mind, your brain, only runs on autopilot. However, there is a significant expansion there, but it's due to that great increase in deep sleep and that regeneration and energy. So, just like people after the various tests we've done, even official ones, they say that in the morning we wake up and don't know where we are. That's just, some Slovaks were joking that after a few days of having the Somavedic, they said we need a pill. What kind of pill? To wake up.
Ivan, is it true that I actually have to have the Somavedic in my bedroom? Because if there are walls in between, then it doesn't work. Or because sometimes I have trouble with light, so if I had it plugged in right in the bedroom, it would probably bother me a little.
Ha, you just set me up for 2 perfect answers. As I said, in open space it's 30 meters through walls. Through doors, it's 15 meters. Of course, those ions are tricky little things that get in there. On the other hand, that's exactly why the new Somavedic Rosalind was created, which we focused on women, female hormones, and reproduction in general. That's also in a rather tragic state in the population. However, it has a distinctly red backlight to suit the circadian rhythm, so it's not a problem in the bedroom. Ideally, if someone wants to have one in the bedroom, there are even better improvements. Like I sometimes use this silly phrase, the problem isn't with the Somavedic. The problem is with the number of Somavedics at home. But I'm definitely looking forward to hearing about your experience with Rosalind in the bedroom. Because the eye doesn't register red and it suits the circadian rhythm. That's amazing.
All parents, we women, want to protect our little ones, and we want to, of course, nurture their health, and then they take care of it themselves for the rest of their lives. So what about children? What have you experienced with Somavedic? Because a lot of mothers, for example, just don't know what to do anymore. They go to different doctors and maybe it's really about the child being overloaded with electrosmog?
There's definitely a lot of truth to that. Of course, water is also a problem. A lot of stories with children come to mind right now, the latest from a Slovak partner who said he came home and didn't say anything. And my daughter, who was 2 or 3 years old, or however old she is, if I'm not mistaken, she immediately put water, milk, and her doll next to the Somavedic, saying she wanted to purify them. She wanted to purify the doll too. And typically, the third eye in people around, or in children, closes around the age of 4 or 5, unless it's kept open. Nevertheless, these children can actually see all these energies. They can also see the psychosomatic and various other issues that are present here. So often, when you see children on the street or in shopping malls, just screaming and throwing tantrums, it's not necessarily because they're spoiled or desperately want some pointless toy, but because they see and feel things that aren't entirely positive.
And they feel all those energies.
There are definitely plenty of children who have actually taken the Somavedic into their own room and won't let it go. And nowadays, with the sheer amount, I'm no longer able to absorb all the feedback. Of course, a lot of it is on the website. And then, of course, there are the haters, but in my experience, the only people who hate on Somavedic are those who don't have it.
Yes, I recently went on a yoga weekend in Austria and I thought, I'll take it with me. Sometimes I don't feel well in hotels because I'm very sensitive, so sometimes I struggle there, especially with sleeping. So this time I took my Somavedic, the travel version, with me. I plugged it in nicely in the hotel room. And if you were to say, how long does it actually take, or rather, even this? What kind of effect it actually has for me when I arrive and the space hasn't been cared for? With anything like that, does it work? It works.
On one hand, for those hotels, now, for example, we're going to have Chateau Herlac. Each room will have a Somavedic. And we're going to take it to a chateau near Paris, to every room, because, of course, there are again geopathogenic zones, electrosmog, psychosomatics, but on top of that, nowadays, psychosomatics are also present there. Add to that the energies, but the energies of those who love, those who maybe had an argument there, or maybe the angry cleaning staff, and again, it just keeps accumulating. Of course, you called it sensitive, but I prefer to call it supersensitive. And today I have to say that in America, it is already considered a medical issue, supersensitivity. So for now, we don't have it covered by health insurance. You'd get a Somavedic, but this kind of supersensitivity is present in those people, and it is of course related to the quality of water. It is related to this environment, to the quality of food, and to the quality of the air. And now I could list dozens of other things that also have an impact. But essentially, as I always try to conclude my lectures in Japan, Somavedic is not a cure-all. It's a helpful crutch for healing, and achieving complete health is hard work.
We both know that. We all know that, maybe even those who are watching us. I had this theory just recently, as I've been studying it a little, that actually, all of us are kind of moving forward energetically, in a way. Those who were in kindergarten move on to elementary school. Those who were in elementary go to the next level. And those who have finished high school go on to university. And that we're all kind of lifting ourselves up a little energetically. And as a result, for many people, chemistry doesn't really work anymore, or maybe just very poorly. We just have to understand that really, physics, which is now kind of replacing chemistry, in helping those of us who have some health issues, is simply here now. And that it's inevitably necessary, and that resisting it is actually pointless. Is that right? Absolutely.
Again, if we break it down to the basics, even if I take Bicom or Somavedic or a powder or a tea, all of it is, in its own way, just a set of frequencies that we need to get into the body. Again, it depends on whether it's physical, astral, or quantum. Like if we start dividing those multiple bodies, the different ones. Each one is affected, and in each one it works differently. There are different frequency differences in each. Of course, a lot of people often ask online on which frequencies it works. Yeah, but for me, the basics are from 2G to 4G, 5G. Basically, 6G is already being launched today. So this has an effect on this, on that. But if I take a classic, paracetamol or regular antibiotics, it's basically a set of frequencies that need to be packed into some kind of carrier, which you send off and it has to reach the target location. And that frequency then acts on the specific, virus or problem, inflammation. But inflammation is again a set of viruses, pathogens. Again, we get into discussing some pretty subtle topics. But let's take the Bicom as an example. For the physical body, it's basically one of the truly best bioresonance devices in the world. I think I have about 6 of them, and I definitely use it at home as a supplementary treatment. And of course also for people, because basically, if I take a paracetamol and bring that frequency somewhere, it's the same as taking the Bicom and basically delivering that frequency wherever I need it. Because we are 70% water, and that frequency gets in there. The biggest problem for a person is actually the transport. That's where the side effects come from. Because again, to get it into the immune system, which is in the gut and into the intestines, you need to somehow package the medicine. You basically burn it in the stomach, and before it gets to the intestines, so that for the active substance to take effect, you either have to boost the amount, or you have to package it in some way. But if you package it in some way, then you can't swallow it. So we have here a bit of a catch-22 situation. Nevertheless, of course, it is possible. Everything is heading toward the fact that frequency-based treatment has its future. It has its justification. The problem is that it's extremely difficult to measure. Again, it's because of the environment, because of the person, because of the operator, because of the devices, and so on. We could probably talk for another hour about why some Bicoms work one way and in some environments another way. Why does it work for some people and not for others? It has its own specific rules, which I've kind of discovered over these 30 years. Nevertheless, the future lies in frequency medicine and in setting DNA.
I'm talking with Ivan Rybjanský, the founder of Somavedic, about water, and also about Somavedic and the influence of Somavedic on water. Why should I drink water with lemon in the morning?
Let me take a slightly broader approach. On the one hand, I claim that the water coming from the tap is literally dead. Of course, a lot of people add stones to it, filter it, and do various other things. And what Somavedic does with the negative ions it generates into the environment. That naturally has an effect on the water and on structuring the water. As I mentioned, people talk about hexagonal water and so on. However, in the 14 plus years that I've been making Somavedics, of course, there were some notable individuals who, I don't want to say I tested it on them, but I did get feedback from them. These were some Olympic athletes who were monitored by doctors. And I claim, after all those tests, those many, maybe dozens, hundreds of thousands of clients, it doesn't matter. I claim that people have a kind of sensor inside them, to put it simply for understanding, that when you drink that water, and when you drink tap water or at a gas station, or basically unstructured water without Somavedic, then the body automatically rejects it. It only takes in a minimal amount into the body. But if you drink structured water, it's basically as if that sensor switches on, and at that moment, the body automatically lets that water into the bloodstream. And if I go back to the basics, that a human is made up of 70% water, in my case. That's almost 70 liters of water, and when I pour coffee into that, tea, sometimes maybe a Coke, I add some food, maybe some supplements, and I don't add that flushing water, then this is what happens in your body, right? So it ferments and ferments, and that's how these inflammations develop. However, if in one day, if I drink, let's say 1 point something liters of water, if, let's say, only a quarter of a liter is used by my brain, if I put it that way, for its own functioning, then if I consider the total amount of water in order to replace all the water in those 70 liters, I once calculated this during a lecture, and now, I don't know how many long months it would take if I were to stick to the recommended drinking regime for that water exchange to actually happen, because the water is, of course, present in every single cell. Nevertheless, from my own experience, I always tell everyone, please, in the morning, when you get up, have 2 or 3 deciliters of water. Squeeze a bit of lemon into it, because after the regeneration that happens at night, when you drink that water first thing in the morning, it's like, pardon the expression, flushing after a big one. That detoxification, those toxins just wash away. On the other hand, between warm water or cold, I just let it sit out overnight like this. That's another secondary issue where a lot of people, according to Chinese medicine, say you should drink warm water. But automatically, when I take structured water and heat it up, in a kettle, in the microwave, on the stove, on a hot plate, then actually, the electrosmog destroys that structure. But as the Chinese say, they heat up the water. Yes, but that was thousands of years ago, when they heated it over a fire. On wood, it doesn't matter, you can heat it up like that just fine. But I'd like to see you make a little fire out of wood just to heat up your water in the morning. It doesn't really help much. I don't get that feedback, so just regular water that's been left to stand at room temperature with a bit of water. But you mustn't add honey, sugar, or any supplements. The only thing I've tried with children who don't really like water with lemon in the morning, except for a few exceptions, is sugar, but grape sugar. That's the only one I've found that doesn't disrupt the structure of the water. So the body actually accepts it. And the second problem is that between 6 and 8 in the morning, the kidneys actually start up, according to Chinese medicine. So as a result, the kidneys are sort of kick-started, and with that pinch, in quotes, of lemon, the filters, so to speak, are cleansed, the ones that collect all the waste. And then the point is to drink it and wait 10, 15, 20 minutes so that you actually don't eat or drink anything else. For people who take any kind of medication and are instructed to take it on an empty stomach, this doesn't do any harm because the water doesn't interfere with being on an empty stomach.
They just wash it down and then continue fasting. Exactly.
But on the other hand, according to Chinese medicine, if I can put it that way, the kidneys, when they get activated, they are really underestimated. For one, there are a lot of people who have pain in the lower back, and in 80 to 90% of cases, it's from the kidneys. The secondary problem is that if we don't hydrate the kidneys in the morning and get them going, they won't cool the liver overheats, and the person becomes irritable. On the other hand, I also have a lot of feedback that if the liver overheats, there's an energetic dependence on the heart, and they draw that energy from the heart. So, when the liver wants to recover, it starts taking energy from the heart. At that moment, the heart has to beat harder to replenish its own energy. But at the same time, my blood pressure goes up. So after a while, people go to the doctor and get heart medication because they have high blood pressure and the heart is actually able to beat harder and supply more to the liver, so it's still okay for now, so to speak. On the other hand, if you don't hydrate the kidneys with water and don't get them going, then the kidneys have a direct impact on fears, stress, and depression, and the whole regulation. And on top of that, if you don't flush them out in the morning, they won't let the water through. Basically, in the morning they close up and don't let water into the lymphatic system. So again, in a manner of speaking, the body's drainage system dries out, and then people try to take something for their lymphatic system. Here, I have these pills. I say, try putting that into a drainage system that's dried out and cram it in there and expect it to move. That doesn't work either. So for a lot of things, drink Somavedic, have some water with it. In the morning, have water with lemon. During the day, drink the structured water, and I say, for 80% of people, 80% of their problems are solved. Then, of course, the more difficult issues are addressed, because those problems have lasted longer and, after all, solving them requires a bit more potential.
Ivan, are there any contraindications with Somavedic?
If I look at it from that negative perspective, like those package inserts for medications, then I don't have anything like that. The only thing that might happen in the beginning is so-called detox. But that's just because the body actually starts to kick in. The lymphatic system starts working. So some women, even those in their 30s, suddenly have teenage skin. They might have longer cycles or more frequent cycles than women. For example, that's actually a sign that something is automatically happening in a woman's body. There could be some elevated temperatures, flu-like symptoms, but again, it's just a way for the body to try to get rid of these things.
So it's kind of like with homeopathy, that it just goes through certain symptoms. Exactly the same.
And again, from homeopathy, there are plenty of homeopaths who use Somavedic devices. And of course, they recommend them. So it's, you could say, based on similar principles, which still aren't fully accepted by mainstream medicine.